I'll admit I've been making a few mistakes with these videos. For one, I keep making allusions to my personality when everyone who stumbles upon my videos wouldn't know me at all. So, in an effort to actually construct an identity that I can keep referring to... Ta-da! A new camera! I told you I'd get one. Oh shit, there we go with that referential crap again. But I digress. Perhaps I can use this to establish more of a presence, because I'm pretty sure that's been my weakest asset so far. On a slightly related note, when I did the Revelations review, I gave it to someone who's been doing this for longer than me, and asked for advice. So hard was it to get consistent feedback anywhere else. Among the very helpful advice they gave me, I got a pointer to put some background music amongst the footage. And to be honest, I wanted to put off doing this for as long as I could. One, because everyone else does it. Two, because I'd rather show off the games in their entirety, audio included, than just have something tangential in the background for the sake of cohesive stability. It's true my efforts to actually mix audio have been a mixed bag, but I'd rather make the effort to try and show off all of the game's bits. I mean, that's why I am as otherwise editing intensive as I am. Today, we make an exception. Danganronpa. Ah yes, Danganronpa. To answer your first question, it means bullet rebuttal, roughly translated. To answer your second question, if I have recorded footage, how am I playing this from the Vita? Well, if you're savvy enough and have enough interest in crappy spin-off consoles, you already know the answer. Yes, I have a PlayStation TV. That's not really fair. The PS TV actually surpassed my expectations as a gaming machine, but it also had a hindrance that still made recording harder, and that is of course the HDCP. So how did I get around that? I just used a run-of-the-mill HDMI splitter. On top of those two hurdles, you remember that short-lived hack that let you bypass the Vita to PS TV whitelist? Yeah, I had to use that because for some reason, and I dare not even try to find out why, the Euro version of Danganronpa 1 is excluded from being played on the PS TV. Not the second one though, or DR1 from any other region, just here. On top of that, I think the PS TV has some weird encoding pattern because it took way longer to render the footage just from Elgato's onboard software. So that's our barometer for today. Instead of, was it worth $50, was it worth going through all that just to play the game on a big TV and review it? The premise is simple. You and 14 other high school students, each with your own separate unique talents, are locked inside the ubiquitous Hope's Peak Academy, and the only method of escape is to commit murder and successfully get away with it. Can you, run-of-the-mill protagonist Makoto Naegi, successfully visual novel your way to the heart of the mystery? Right off the bat, I'll say that a very, very large part of this game's appeal is the story, and the story is chock full of spoilers, but I will never directly spoil anything. I'll be indirect and with plenty of warning, so you can just mute to avoid until it's over if you so desire. In a general sense, I think the story is good, but I have a soft spot for a good whodunit. A good murder mystery with a decent sense of secrecy will always get the methodical, investigating part of my brain running, so my opinion may not be worth much. But right away I'll say Danganronpa is easily one of the best of this subset of crime-based Japanese point-and-click visual novel adventure games, mostly because it has a sense of engagement to it. Let me explain. I've played a few visual novels before, but most of them are slow. And in most of them, it is painfully obvious that the visual novel setup is a crutch for what they couldn't achieve with a bigger budget and an actual game engine. Can't show all the finer details? Just whack some prose on there, that'll do the trick, right? And it's not a matter of, oh, I don't like reading. On the contrary, I'm a very fast reader. I'm getting off topic again. Danganronpa is much more than the sum of its parts, and it's far more interesting than you would believe from the outset. It's immediately apparent what the actual setup of the game will be just from the way Monokuma explains everything. You go through several days until he reveals a motive, someone uses that motive to kill someone else, you do some CSI, you go to a trial and put your knowledge of the situation to the test until you figure out the killer, and then you do it all over again. And systematic frameworks like this can really put me off. I haven't watched a lot of anime because what I have watched has been very serialized to save on money, but Danganronpa is better than any anime, except for Gankutsuo, because it has a far better sense of pacing than its ilk. For one, before each of the trials there'll be some investigation, and before that will usually be some story beats about actually trying to escape from the school. But just about everything you're told has a purpose, and it usually foreshadows something to do with the murder itself, even if it's incidental. But this is cleverly hidden to never become a pattern. In short, the game never wasted my time, but it was almost always one step ahead, and almost always engaging. I say almost always because naturally, a game that holds the reins to its own pacing so tightly means the player can't always share in it. The nature of this game's linearity means that you have no real room for experimentation in solving the game's puzzles. So if you figure out what's going on ahead of the game before the writing itself does, you might still have to wait for it to catch up. Which sucks, but at least it doesn't happen nearly as often as in, say, Ace Attorney. By the way, I hate Ace Attorney. I despise it. It might be my most spited modern game series, but it's sadly also Danganronpa's closest analogue. But yeah, I hate Ace Attorney because it suffers the aforementioned problem a lot more. In Danganronpa, this is usually a lot smoother. It's not perfect, but it tends to make sense. How else is DR better than AA? Well, DR wasn't written by children who haven't actually been in the presence of death. Writing wacky comedy into tragic dark stories like this can be intimidating, but Danganronpa knows when to shut up and get serious, when to get all jovial, or maybe even when to use someone's wacky talents to lead into a situational clue. The game does a startlingly good job of naturally bleeding in comedy when it needs to, while keeping the overarching mood dark as hell. After all, that's the motif here, and it's not really a spoiler to say it's the entire motive behind Monokuma doing this in the first place, to manufacture an ever-present feeling of despair. But that's something else the game gets right a lot of these games don't. It approaches its overarching feeling with a lot of tact and subtlety. When the school starts opening up and the student body gets more thin as you get further into the game, it truly feels more isolating. Hope's Peak feels more hollow and empty, and eventually you will notice how few of you are left even if the game will not explicitly point it out to you. This is to say nothing of the music either. The dark wave motif works very well in making Hope's Peak feel cold and cordoned off, making it always feel alien, even as it should be more homely. If it sounds like I'm describing what would be in other games simply called good atmosphere, then it should be evidence of how Danganronpa has a better grasp of the universal qualities of good writing, when a lot of virtual novels seem encumbered by their format. I mean, I was very worried the characters would all be archetypes defined by their ultimate title. I mean, why else would they be so prominent in the game, right? It's just another trap these games usually fall into, but they are legitimately well written, having actual personalities that evolve, develop and show over the course of the game, and while their special abilities may factor into things depending on the character, they never dominate it. Well, except for Hifumi, not much you can do there. But it does feel as if you live and learn alongside these people, and they are believable as such. But these qualities just make Danganronpa a solid experience. What pushes it over the edge is Monokuma. He honestly might be one of my favourite villains in recent years. He's conniving, but you can't help but love him. He's complete evil, and he would never deny his actions are doing nothing but harm, but he also has to put on a charade of being fair, so he's completely bound by the rules he has set for all of these other students, so he can especially lavish in his role of chess master, and he only breaks these rules when he's completely up against the wall. He goes a long way to making the overarching mystery of Hope's Peak worth solving, and that mystery is on another level of interesting when all's said and done. The final act is this glorious payoff to everything that came before that successfully manages to upend everything you thought you knew about the circumstances. Just when you think you have all the answers, Monokuma changes the questions. When I hit the big plot twist of the game, my reaction was a little something like this. But no game is perfect. Not even Deus Ex. The exceptional pacing of the game supersedes any gameplay holes, but being frank, I cannot see how these bullet minigames could have had any consistency. The best moments of these cases are the most straightforward in implementation, when you have to pick from multiple choices or simply present a piece of evidence. The main minigame, interrupting someone's statement with a contradiction, is often obtuse and always ham-fisted. It feels like it's just been grafted onto the game, and a more straightforward setup baked into the dialogue system would have been more coherent. And the less said about Hangman Gambit, the better. Also, no bones, the first hour is extremely weak, doing a poor job at hiding the skeleton of the game, and doing little more than building mild mystique and confusion at the situation. With how strong the characters are in the end, the way you are introduced to them does pretty much everything it can to do your head in. This seems to be a persistent issue with games with a long list of characters you'll consistently see. Rather than naturally introduce them over time, they just cram them all in one location and expect you to learn everyone's identity in less than 5 minutes. We have to fix this problem. I'm starting to see this a lot, and I don't know why writers haven't caught on. It just gives the player a headache. Also, while Danganronpa mostly evades the general trap of being caught up in limited thematics, the absolute very end of the game just can't resist from throwing in a cheesy monologue about clinging to hope and such. Stay on topic, you had a good thing going, not being so transparent about it. But again, at least Danganronpa doesn't suffer from this nearly as much as other visual novels. In fact, Danganronpa is the best visual novel because it doesn't suck suck at the things other visual novels suck at. It's a gripping mystery from beginning to end, and I can say I had a lot of fun exploring it. And I was kidding about the anime comment. I don't have a good frame of reference. I don't know if that was a particularly expressive review. Seemed kinda waffly. I feel like I broke it down too much because I had to tiptoe around spoilers. How to fix it? I know, let's compare it to the second game. Immediately, Danganronpa 2 drew my attention and got points for keeping that sense of mystery to returning players, even though this is basically the same premise as the first one. You know something is wrong when one of the characters seems to mirror the protagonist of the first game, and you're taking the spot of the secondary protagonist instead, and when one character just seems to pop up again wholesale. Already the dynamics have changed, and the way these characters are introduced makes way more sense. They're spread out across the opening island, so they have more room to be themselves. And that's about all the game improves upon. But I don't want it to come across as if Goodbye Despair is a complete regression. The overarching mystery is still there, as is the fearful atmosphere of knowing one of your friends could be dead at any time. Tension still rides about as high as Towerly, but the game is more overwritten than the first, and a lot of the subtleties that made the first game so magical aren't necessarily gone, but are in lower quantities. The change of setting isn't so great. The desolation of an archipelago in the middle of nowhere can't really compare to the claustrophobia of the closed high school, though they do make the attempt. The fact the game's location is much more open might make the actual walking between locations flow better, but there are just so many more plot holes as a result of opening up the scope of events. The cloistered hallways of Hope's Peak meant no murderer could ever really hide their evidence, but there are just so many more opportunities to dispose of evidence on Jabberwock Island that no one seems to take. I know there's this rule about no littering that Monokuma and the students still have to follow, but there's also this rule about extreme violence that is obviously not followed by the fact that these kids are fucking dying. Chapter 2 in particular is just broken. Also, I feel like the sequel had to be bigger and better, so the side characters are a lot livelier, which was absolutely good at first because it made the first couple of hours not seem like a slog, but it begins to work against itself when you realise how much harder the character writing leans on gimmicks. My fear with the first game seems to have been founded here, because most characters, especially in the first half, are their abilities and goofy character establishing moments first, and their actual personalities and character development second. They have character development, but most seems cordoned off to the optional free time events rather than just being woven into the story. There is one big exception, but this may just be the weakest part of the game. Trigger Happy Havoc wasn't so concerned with its ideals rather than just telling a long-running claustrophobic horror story, but one of the characters of the sequel undergoes a sudden shift so radical it's unbelievable. Like, literally. And this is done for equal parts shock value and values espousing. But the way they talk from then on is on another realm of existence. Like, I don't care where you live, no one in real life talks like this. It's annoying to have to veil a spoiler-laden game like this, but if you've played it, you know who I'm talking about. But then they undergo a third shift in personality, and it's a little more believable, but it's also at that point the ultimate mystery of Jabberwock Island starts to get very interesting, and it all leads up to probably the best ending since Metal Gear Solid 3. Seriously, the final act is such a defenestration of anything you could have imagined the ending to be up to that point, especially since they've already played with your expectations plenty. The major plot twist of the first game is casually mentioned in, like, the second chapter, and something you expect to be a big conspiracy turns out to have the simplest explanation of all. But the end of the game is so far beyond anything you could have expected, and it completely changes what you know about the 20 hours you would have spent getting up to that point. Though it gets a bit mired in its ridiculous hope versus despair dichotomy, it does find room to meaningfully poke holes in that too, and it makes the final act the main characters do so full of actual meaning and weight that I can look past it being a bit of a plot hole. I mean, I tolerated the ending to Terminator 2 just fine. It's a shame the overarching mystery is really the only thing carrying the sequel, without much help from all its other elements, but that ending seriously makes it all worth it. And even if it didn't, we'd still have Monokuma, a villain so strong and confident he could have saved Final Fantasy XIII 2 in place of that putz Caius. You know, I'm not ready for another episode just yet. Gee, if only there was another mid-core in a series that is getting increasingly convoluted. That's it, Metroid Other M! Yes, I am a natural charisma magnet. No, it's Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes. Actually, I don't feel like playing this yet either. Ha! Okay, fine. Next time I'll be taking a look at the latest game in this series, another episode : Ultra Despair Girls. Titles are not this series' strong suit. Oh man, did I not mention how much worse DR2's Hangman's Gambits are? Geez, and I was complaining about the game itself being overwritten.